We have panel one dealing with hydrogen. I'm going to briefly introduce Dr. Scott McWhorter. Scott is chairman of the board of directors of the Southeast Hydrogen Energy Alliance. He is just recently retired after a 20-year career with the Department of Energy, Savannah River National Lab. He has a great deal of knowledge and in-depth experience with regard to solar, advanced manufacturing, grid integration, hydrogen and fuel cell technologies. Scott earned his undergraduate degree in chemistry and his PhD from LSU. Go Tigers. And Scott, I'm going to give you a heads up before I stop screen sharing and turn the panel over to you that Sunita is online. I think she's going to listen in on this panel. And if when you get to moderated discussion, don't hesitate to call her out and have her unmute and join your discussion. Scott, all yours.
Will do. Thanks, David, and thanks all the sponsors as well. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. So I think as David and everyone alluded to, that we've got an interesting panel discussion on hydrogen today. Anywhere from perspectives on the rural cooperatives vision on hydrogen, to delivering hydrogen through pipelines, even the end use of hydrogen through combustion processes or fuel cells, and maybe even production of hydrogen through electrolysis. And then finally, kind of the economics of it and what it's going to take to be there. So, but before I introduce the panel, I thought I would talk a little bit about our Southeast Hydrogen Energy Alliance. As David said, I'm chairman of the board of directors for the Southeast Hydrogen Energy Alliance, and the alliance has really started to come together the last year and a half, 2 years, as a regional convener of interested entities, whether it's utilities, end users, universities, national labs, and really when I was with the Savannah River National Lab, leading this effort, really took it from we took it from a state focus, just primarily South Carolina focus, to a regional effort. Where we are today is really looking at facilitating those partnerships with all of these different entities. And you can see the board makeup today is Duke Energy, Dominion Energy, NextEra, Siemens, Michelin, Clemson, South Carolina, University of South Carolina, and Summit Works. But we're also working in conjunction with E4 Carolinas. And we've developed this partnership with E4 Carolinas based on the energy ecosystem that David and E4 had really developed around nuclear and solar, and really saw that was the future for hydrogen, to be ubiquitous and to grow and to have the potential to decarbonize, not really anticipating that hydrogen would be this popular and at this stage of the game, and that it would move as quickly to the need for hydrogen this fast. But with that, my view on this is, decarbonization using hydrogen is really, we've got to transition to green hydrogen. But if we did it today, right, under the current grid mix, hydrogen via electrolysis would generate more CO2 than our SMR, steam methane reforming, today, right? But because of the grid mix. So my position is that really decarbonization using hydrogen starts with the grid, right? So we have to get the grid decarbonized initially in order to really move into a green, clean hydrogen perspective. But the good news is that we're seeing that transition, and it should happen fairly quickly, where we come into parity with coal gasification and steam methane reforming in the U.S. by 2028 is what some early estimates are. and hopefully Brian and others can give us a little more perspective on how quickly they can transition here. But I will say that it's going to take all of these technologies that we've talked about and that we're talking about today for hydrogen to really be utilized to decarbonize the grid. And with that, it's going to take all different colors of hydrogen. I know we talk about these different colors today, from blue to green to purple, and there's a lot of focus on green, or what we refer to as really green, where hydrogen is enabling the growth of renewables. But it's going to start with blue, right? So where we take hydrogen that is generated today from steam methane reforming and add carbon capture to it, and then transition hydrogen from natural gas through a pyrolytic process with carbon production. We're capturing that carbon and using it as a value add. But it's all of these have to make a business case in an economic sense. So we'll hear more about that. But in the Southeast, we're really positioned because of the renewables that are coming online in the grid and the utility scale and even residential scale, that there's a huge potential to use that for green hydrogen production. And not only just solar, but there's a huge potential for wind, offshore wind, and the potential for hydrogen to help grow that that power area. And then finally, the way I see it is we have a huge potential for purple hydrogen too, using either the electrons or the heat to help generate hydrogen from nuclear power. And hopefully we'll hear maybe a little bit about that in the panel today. So some opportunities for getting into the hydrogen game in the Southeast. The Department of Energy has issued a notice of intent for a regional clean hydrogen analysis. And this is really what we see as a Kickstarter for what's the big game, the end game that's coming, are the hydrogen hubs, right? And this allows each region to really start to get their act together, to look at decarbonization potentials, cost, all the techno-economics that are going to be involved, and identify those projects that are going to have huge impact. And it's going to take everybody. The stakeholders are state and local governments, regional coalitions, industry, and non-government stakeholders, just everyone that really wants to get involved should get involved in these efforts. And it's really driven by DOE's hydrogen Earthshot to achieve $1 per kilogram of hydrogen by 2030. And we think we can get there. When I was at DOE, and I actually worked for Sonita for about 3 years while at Savannah River on assignment. I supported a lot of those efforts in the office and did a lot of analysis on the cost of storage and cost of hydrogen, and saw the great job that DOE was doing at lowering the cost of these technologies, and have seen what that type of investment, the impact that can have. And I see all the opportunity for investment that's coming. And so I really am positive that we can make an impact on this. Now, what's the end game here is to really set up a regional hydrogen hub that is set forth by the infrastructure bill that was just passed by the House. Hasn't been signed by the president yet, but we expect that next week. And it calls for 4 regional hubs, right? And there's $8 billion set aside for those 4 regional hubs. The money's probably, the funding's probably going to be distributed between 3 offices within DOE. One, we can ask Sunita about that later, but one in ERA, some in nuclear energy, and some on the fossil side of the house. But it's really about these large scale demonstrations and showing the impact to achieve that $1 per kilogram of hydrogen, and showing the impact across delivery, storage, and end use. So what we see here in the Southeast is that there's strong competition, because a lot of these are set forth by the language in areas that have natural gas resources or coal resources today. So obviously, we think the Texas Gulf Coast is going to be a strong player. The Great Lakes area, the Ohio Valley, including West Virginia, is going to be a strong competitor. And then Southern California, the LA Basin area, that has really pushed the transportation sector over the last decade or so. And if the Southeast is really going to compete in this, we have to show why this region, why now, why us, right? So, and we think the Southeast is a great place to really show this connection from logistics. We've got some of the major ports in the U.S., in Charleston, in Savannah, in Wilmington, and the connection of those ports via rail in the inland ports, as we refer to them, to industry, and how that's connected to material handling and other airports, so aviation and long haul trucking. And you can start to see the network that would create. So it's a great example of how the Southeast can really start to show impact in this area. So hopefully we'll shed some light on the different areas that from delivery to power production and in end use and even the economics of this through our panel today. So I'll stop sharing my screen and we'll introduce one of the first speaker on the panel, Callum Peace, who's the hydrogen lead pipeline engineer for Wood PLC. So Callum leads Wood's hydrogen pipeline development team, developing projects for green, blue, and gray hydrogen today, and has got experience with liquid hydrogen, ammonia, and other organic carriers. So Callum, I'll turn it over to you if you wanted to say a few words. Or
Thank you, Scott. I'll just unmute myself. Thanks. I'll just try share my screen now. So hopefully that should now be coming through. So as Scott mentioned, my name is Callum Peace. I'm Wood's Hydrogen Pipeline Task Force lead. We're a specialist organisation within Wood who conduct research and development around hydrogen pipelines, making sure we're kind of fully up to date with the latest developments in hydrogen transportation. We look at moving specific carriers around and the infrastructure that's needed to move those specifically. So firstly, for those that don't know who Wood are, we have the kind of the size and scale to kind of create competitive advantages on numerous different projects. We have over 160 years experience in certain sectors of the business, and we have kind of 40,000 employees worldwide. And we're kind of packed full of subject matter experts within the various different departments and technologies and energy sectors. So within the energy sectors, Wood works across all energy transition and power sections. So we've basically, within the wind sector, we have supplied 64 gigawatts with this, have the kind of combined power of 10% of the globally installed wind power was installed by Wood. Within solar, we have 200 plus projects globally over the last 5 years, including pilot projects across different business units. We also do carbon capture technology, which we've worked on across basically since the mid-90s, since kind of the starting of the technology, we were across that on a net zero Teesside project in the United Kingdom, which is where I'm based and dialing in from. So for that specific project, had a total capacity of 6 million tons per annum. So I want to now kind of talk more about hydrogen kind of transportation specifically, but these, as have been mentioned, are particularly related around the idea of solar, wind, and carbon capture, depending on which color of the spectrum you're in for the transportation. So what are the actual kind of transportation challenges that we see? So the easiest way to think about it is it's broken down into different parts. Just moving nationally, which is the kind of the hydrogen hub for Houston there, which is kind of demonstrated. This involves the kind of building of new and the repurposing of pipelines for both pure hydrogen and hydrogen blending with natural gas. You can construct hydrogen clusters and hydrogen hubs. So the clusters are around decarbonisation, particularly high emitting industries, say around steel manufacturing, and those sort of kind of subjects around there. We work a lot with, say, the mining companies and try decarbonisation that they're large kind of dumper trucks that they move around a lot of their material. So it's about specifically decarbonisation sectors. You also have a branch into international. So what's shown there is the hydrogen gas backbone, which is across Europe. So this will be sharing hydrogen production that's produced down in Spain and Italy, where they've got a lot of solar and wind, and then shipping that through all the existing networks up into Europe and across the sea. So this includes both onshore pipelines and subsea pipelines. Then you need to think about it globally. If places don't have hydrogen, they're not able to make their own green hydrogen, who can ship it in? So this can be done in kind of lots of different transportation vectors: liquid hydrogen, ammonia, and methocyclohexane. So I hope I pronounced that correctly. That is, I guess, the most difficult word to say out of all of the slides I've got here. So that comes down to looking at moving large volumes of this hydrogen around, what infrastructure is needed to move it, what is the size capacity of it, and is it technically ready to actually move it? Because particularly around liquid hydrogen, I've got a separate slide on that to come. It's not technically ready to move at the current scale. We're talking 1,000 times more than is currently moved is what needs to be moved in a single unit. So the amount of technology upscaling is quite dramatic. When it comes to industry experience of hydrogen transportation, this isn't new kind of by any means. So it's been around for decades with a significant length of pipelines currently in operation. So this is kind of presented on the right-hand side, where you can see there's approximately kind of 2,800 miles of hydrogen pipelines currently in operation, with the majority of them being in the United States. So these use low-strength steels, which are designed for very low stresses. So you're only using a very limited amount of what the actual pipeline can take in terms of pressure. And then this means that, kind of for comparison, it's about a 30 to 50% of the strength versus a 72% of the strength, which is a normal gas pipe, what would be used to move it around. Within the UK and also globally around kind of China, they use something called town/coal gas. So this has been around for kind of decades and what used to be shipped through a lot of networks. But this contained 50% hydrogen. However, it also contained 20% carbon monoxide and oxygen. So obviously we don't use those anymore within the network, but those actually acted as an inhibitor to prevent a lot of the material challenges associated with hydrogen. So specifically, kind of what are these hydrogen related challenges on the material? So these come down to really two main aspects. There's the reduction in effective toughness of the material. So hydrogen is absorbed into kind of existing small cracks, which are always in existence within kind of carbon steel pipelines. So this assists with the crack propagation under a static kind of pressure of the load. So this is just going to make the pipeline less tough and more susceptible to damage. The second is that of the fatigue. So within a pipeline system, there are always going to be fluctuations in pressure. Onshore, kind of coming out of a compressor, it will constantly fluctuate and change. Or offshore, you get the fluctuations in pressure, but you also get the combined loading of the wave and the currents. So within there, it again is absorbed into the existing cracks, but it's now under cyclic stress. So from the amount of R&D that's taking place at the moment, this is looking like it's 10 to 30 times more severe than natural gas. This is obviously, these two are a big problem that we need to solve when it comes to repurposing of pipelines. So there's lots of research and development that's taking place globally. So these are around materials testing and developing more accurate models around fatigue analysis and developing what is known as an SN curve. So for those that aren't aware, that's a stress and the number of cycles curve. We're able to use that curve to determine at what point will the pipeline fail. There's also lots of joint industry practices going on that are referred to as JIPs. Some of the ones on the board we're involved with, but they're mainly focusing around doing more testing, so we're able to update the codes and standards which are on the next page. Globally, there's also a lot of trials taking place. One of them is within the UK called High Deploy. They have injected hydrogen into an existing gas network within Kiel University specifically. That was up to about, say, 15%, just to see what that would actually have an impact on. Although to start with, this is done within kind of an off connection from the actual main network, and it's done around polyurethane pipes, not carbon steel pipes. When it comes to the supply of hydrogen pipelines, there are two different branches of design, which I will come to, but it's determining, are the pipe mills and the manufacturers of the pipe ready to supply this new product? So when it comes to it, several of them say they are H2 ready, where we kind of guess through many different researches that we've done, and only one has come out so far that I'm aware of publicly saying they are ready to supply this new product, which is going to provide the same material strength as traditional carbon steel pipes. So kind of data sheets and specifications are needed to meet these demands. So when it comes to kind of the codes itself, there's only one real code which is considered the hydrogen pipeline code, and that's the ASME guideline. So this is kind of broken down into two main subsections called options. The first is called the prescriptive method. This is based on existing operating experience. We use very, I guess, weaker strength steel and only use 50% of its strength. There's the option B approach, which is referred to as the performance based. So you're doing real testing on hard steel and then trying to see, can you get the full strength and safety capacity out of it, which is 70% of the minimum specified yield strength. When it comes to repurposing, the lines are already in place. This leads to kind of some challenges. When we consider repurposing and blending, it's quite important to understand that it's not just a code impact, but a fluid impact. So an important point to note is that there's a volumetric energy density of natural gas and hydrogen result in different energy flows. So hydrogen has a high gravimetric energy density, 2 to 3 times that of methane. However, hydrogen volumetric density is significantly lower. When we look at the repurposing and what that would actually mean when we're sending it through an existing network, we get a 45% reduction in energy when it's an option A approach. And for an option B approach, when we've got to test the material, we only get a 13% reduction. An important point to note is you still do get a reduction if you need to kind of remain the same within the actual requirements. So what are the different transportation vectors? So when it comes to hydrogen transportation vectors, they often come in 3 different forms. There's the liquid hydrogen and ammonia and methyl-cyclohexane, with 2 of these being at cryogenic temperatures. So the one particularly to note is liquid hydrogen, which is at minus 253 degrees, 20 odd degrees, about from absolute zero. So we're talking very cold. So we're working with different clients worldwide to bridge the gap in the technology. So although it's not new technology and liquid hydrogen has been used for, say, the aerospace industry a lot, which is where a lot of the experience is coming from, we still need to upscale it. So within the diagram that's in the bottom corner there is the Kawasaki Heavy Industries LH2 project. That needs to be scaled up about 1,000 times more than what's shown there in order to be able to be shipped the amount of hydrogen that we need to ship. So there's a real upscaling that needs to be done to kind of to meet the demands that are needed for the future in terms of hydrogen. So we're kind of branching off this existing experience for small scale operations and off the aerospace industry to determine kind of what is needed. So we're developing qualification roadmaps. So within the next 3, 5, 10 years, we'll have different products ready for different clients to be able to actually start moving hydrogen. So that kind of rounds up my slides are kind of on the transportation of hydrogen, and I'd kind of like to thank everyone for their attention, and I'll kind of hand it back to yourself, Scott.
All right, thanks, Callum. That was a great review of the delivery pipeline and some of the transport issues. So we look forward to further discussion on that. So our next panelist is Stephanie Crawford. She's a senior regulatory manager with ENRICA, which is the National Rural Electric Cooperatives Association. She's been with ENRICA for the past 4 years and has managed NRECA's regulatory advocacy program. And before that, she was an ORISE fellow with the Department of Energy at the Office of European and Eurasian Affairs, and advised all the clients on U.S. energy policy and regulations. So, Stephanie, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Scott. And let me try to pull up my slides. And can you see that? Is that in good view format?
Looks good. You want to go to slideshow? Yeah.
Okay. Does that work? Okay.
Yep. Perfect.
All right. Thank you. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. As Scott was mentioning, I advocate on behalf of America's Electric Cooperatives before federal agencies in Washington, D.C. So I'm going to be keeping my remarks pretty high level and policy oriented as to the types of developments with regard to hydrogen that we as NRECA are advocating for in order for hydrogen to become a viable technology for electric cooperatives to consider as the power sector and the broader economy evolve over the next couple of decades. So let me start off with who cooperatives are. This map illustrates how, if you're not familiar with co-ops, we are probably located in or near a community near you. There are nearly 900 cooperatives across the country, covering 56% of the nation's landmass. And they serve 42 million Americans across the country in rural, exurban, and suburban communities alike. And as you can see, being so geographically spread out, every co-op is facing different challenges in terms of fuel mix and potential options for that mix, power delivery in terms of different costs, the terrain that they face, and all of these factors play into how they make decisions to deliver affordable, reliable power to their consumer members. So within our membership, there are a variety of options depending on their circumstances, and that's how I expect that they will be evaluating hydrogen opportunities and challenges as well. And speaking of affordable, reliable power, this is really central to cooperatives because we are consumer-owned, not-for-profit utilities. And just a minute on our business model for those who are not familiar. Cooperatives operate at cost and are governed by democratically elected boards. The folks that serve on these boards are part of the communities that serve the co-ops. So the focus at cooperatives when it's looking at a new technology or a new service to provide, it's always really about asking, how will this benefit our members? Will it benefit our members? And given that they operate at cost, it's important to remember too that any new cost that the co-op takes on is ultimately passed on to the end of the line consumer. So it's really central to their decision making in terms of asking about how different technologies or services could impact their consumer members. And oftentimes, cooperatives are serving folks who can least afford cost increases. We serve 92% of the nation's persistent poverty counties. So cost, again, is front of mind. And remember that those are passed directly on to the end of the line consumers. So let me turn now to how hydrogen can potentially fit into the picture for cooperatives. Just looking at this big picture concerning how hydrogen may or may not fit into the Biden administration's clean energy goals, which I think some other folks had mentioned in the intro. As you're aware, the Biden administration has a goal of achieving carbon-free electricity by 2035, as well as economy-wide net zero carbon by 2050. And we believe these goals are going to drive significant changes to how electricity is generated, distributed, and used by customers. We believe that such a transition must be accomplished through a just and reasonable approach over a reasonable and realistic time period, and accounting for those regional differences and resource availability. And that means supporting funding for a range of energy technologies that will be needed to achieve these goals. We think that there needs to be multiple options available at commercial scale, and that are cost effective for cooperatives if they're going to meet these decarbonization goals. And I think, as Michael alluded to in the intro, cooperatives are doing a lot already in terms of solar, storage, microgrids, carbon capture use and storage. And we do see a potential role for hydrogen in the future if the technology can be advanced in a cost-effective manner. Oh wait, not next slide yet. So to get there, in terms of we need a continued commitment to research, development, and demonstration of hydrogen technologies and their applications, with the objective of driving down that cost for wide-scale deployment to make this a reality. We see it as one potential option in the toolbox, and as I mentioned, we need multiple options available to us. We also see hydrogen as potentially providing opportunities for cooperatives who may be retiring current assets now or in the near future to repurpose those sites or associated infrastructure and to provide potential workforce opportunities to employees being displaced. Co-ops are really vital to the economic health of the communities they serve. And so we think that the technology options being developed, for example, through DOE's Hydrogen Earthshot, may provide a new opportunity to support that mission. We think that new hydrogen projects could help transition some communities in terms of supporting displaced employees, as well as replacing some of the tax base for these local communities. And again, co-ops being so focused on the communities they serve. And finally, we see the potential in terms of the diverse applications that we're hearing about throughout the panel with regard to hydrogen being very intriguing. And so we think that the opportunities from that standpoint with hydrogen are widespread. So to move on to the challenges, in terms of the challenges that I consistently hear regarding hydrogen, the biggest is cost. So that's why I've emphasized it here. It's not that there's 3 different costs, but that's the number one thing I hear about. And as co-ops, are looking at new technology options, it's important to remember too that they're serving a lot of lower income folks. Low income households tend to spend a disproportionately higher amount of their income on energy bills. And so that's something, again, that we want to be mindful of, developing cost-effective solutions as we decarbonize to not disproportionately impact those consumers. So we think unless the cost issues with regard to hydrogen can be addressed, we're not seeing it being a cost competitive solution at significant scale for utility scale power production. But we do support DOE focusing near-term research on hydrogen with regard to those other sectors that are hard to abate emissions, aviation, shipping, cement, and steel, where clean hydrogen can be a really valuable asset in decarbonization, and we see it as a potential storage option for the power sector. We think that major investments will be needed for upgrades to demonstrate the viability of hydrogen in multiple applications, and so we support funding from DOE as well as stakeholder engagement and education that we think will be needed to realize the benefits of hydrogen. So we really want to see continued hydrogen R&D, and that's why we were pleased to see in the bipartisan infrastructure bill that I think Scott mentioned, that there's that continued commitment there from Congress in what was just passed. So we think this is an important step. We hope that there's a role for co-ops who are interested in the hubs that may now be set up. And as you saw on the map, the co-ops are located throughout the country, so they could potentially play a role in those different applications being explored. It's also why we indicated our support earlier this year in DOE's Hydrogen Earthshot And we think that things like grants, cooperative agreements, and similar mechanisms will be helpful towards achieving that goal. And finally, I just want to mention, I've listed here in terms of challenges, but community buy-in is really that it's important. So we think it needs to be a focus going forward. We want to make sure that as solutions are developed, particularly as these projects move into the demonstration phase, co-ops are considered as partners because they can really be helpful conduits in their communities. We think that working with cooperatives as potentially the DOE hydrogen program moves forward will help ensure that these technologies are developed in a way that can really benefit the communities they serve, some of these rural and underserved communities. The organizations closest to the communities technically, they're going to be best suited to develop solutions that meet their needs. So projects funded by DOE in particular, we'd like to see them incorporate community engagement at the outset. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult to understand their specific needs and how a funded project may implement solutions that would have a meaningful impact on their consumers' lives. And further down the road, we think that community buy-in is going to be necessary so that permitting challenges are not preventing projects from moving forward. So I will leave it there, and I welcome any questions during Q&A. And now I'll turn it back to Scott, and my contact information will be available to you also afterward. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Stephanie. And you brought up some great points about the rural cooperatives that we don't normally think about. So I look forward to kind of digging into those a little bit more. So our next panelist is Thomas Koepp, who is the head of business development and innovation at Siemens Energy. And Thomas is responsible for those applications in addition to driving new business strategies and incubation of new solutions in the energy market, and all for looking towards decarbonization, right? So he leads a lot of their decarbonization initiatives. He is the principal investigator currently for a US DOE project funded out of fossil energy with Clemson on a hydrogen combined heat and power storage system. So, and Thomas is also a member of the Southeast Hydrogen Energy Alliance board. So with that, I'll turn it over to Thomas.
All right, good morning, everybody. You can see my screen here. So
We do, looks good.
Yeah. Okay. Good morning, and thank you for including me in the panel here. Really exciting to hear the different speakers and also to share the perspective from Siemens Energy today. So a little bit about Siemens Energy. Siemens has been in the US actually for a very long period of time. In 1891, Siemens had its first manufacturing facility in Chicago in support of that famous World Fair in 1893. So we've been here in the US for a long time, have many customers, really support not just the energy industry, but many different areas from a Siemens perspective. Our company last year spun off from Siemens, and now we're focused purely on energy, and we're individually managed and traded. Our headquarters in the US are in Orlando. We have over 10,000 employees in the US at 84 different locations, 26 different production facilities. And one I'd like to highlight in the Carolinas is our manufacturing facility in Charlotte. It's been in the area for a long time. It was actually one of the first air-conditioned manufacturing facilities in the Southeast. So I'm gonna go to my next slide. A little bit about our business. So, you know, we're really an energy pure play where we have products in generation, industrial application, new energy business, and renewables. We're really growing our new energy business. This is really our electrolyzers or our hydrogen production. We use PEM technology where we take electricity and water to produce hydrogen and also oxygen. This is something that is really growing in the world and in the US, and something that we're placing a lot of emphasis on. Also, I want to mention on the generation. So today in the US, Siemens Energy supports about 1/3 of all generating assets in the US. We have many different products from gas turbines to steam turbines. Also want to mention the transmission. So we have a lot of expertise in the different transmission from high voltage lines to grids to substations. And then also on the industrial applications wherever energy is needed in that area. We're tackling this decarbonization really with these 3 pillars. So focusing on the generation to reduce our emissions, looking at the transportation of electricity and storage, and then reducing the CO2 on the industrial side. I do want to highlight on the generation side, we've really supported the overall reduction in emissions in the transition from coal to gas. So we have a lot of emphasis on gas turbines. We've made a pledge that by 2030 that our gas turbine fleet will run on 100% hydrogen. A real example of one of our products is also in the Carolinas. We have a plant that has been running now for over a year, since July. It's a project that Siemens Energy and Duke Energy have partnered on, putting in a 9,000 HL, so a 400 megawatt plus gas turbine. It has current capability of 50% hydrogen co-firing. And I think another important attribute is its ramp rate. So this product can ramp at 85 megawatts a minute. And that's really important to be able to have dispatchable energy to support the renewable, variable renewable energy that we're having. Okay, that's been a real success for us in the Carolinas. I wanted to spend a little bit of time, as Scott had mentioned, about the project that we're collaborating on between Clemson University, Duke Energy, and Siemens Energy. So we're working on a conceptual design of a hydrogen storage system. Really, this is in collaboration with the DOE, where we've received some funding. And here's kind of a schematic of the system that we're looking at, right? So we want zero carbon electricity. Okay, we're integrating it with the grid. From this, we're powering our electrolyzer, which uses then the electricity as well as water to produce the hydrogen. This is stored, and then the site that we're targeting is at Clemson University, where we have a CHP plant. So it uses a small 15 megawatt gas turbine. And so here we would co-fire that application, thereby decarbonizing the steam as well as the electricity. And then we're also looking for other off-takers. So through the study, which started in February or in March, we've really learned a lot about also the economics and the challenges that we have with hydrogen today. And so a key aspect is the offtake. Yeah, and what we're learning is, I guess it's easy to focus on one industry, but where it gets exciting is when you start to combine industries. So what's really exciting about hydrogen, its ability to bring different industries together, because different industries need electricity or molecules or energy at different times. And when you combine this, there is definitely optimization and opportunity available. So here's a summary of the project. As you can see, there's a little picture of the CHP plant. The plant already exists. It's in kind of the last stages of being commissioned to support the campus with steam. So it's a fairly new application. And what's so exciting about this is really its use cases, as I just mentioned. So we have the option here of combining not only just energy or electricity, but also industrial steam, and then we're also looking at mobility and transport. The project has really been a success in terms of collaboration. We're also looking at continuing the collaboration to do further research, taking this the concept that we have, building it out, and then also learning from it. There's a lot to be learned on how on the integration. So when you have this system where you have these different assets, co-located, there is a lot to be learned on how we then operate it in its optimal form. So there's different ways of how to do that, and that's something that we plan on learning. I do also want to highlight cost as well. So today, from an energy perspective, the cost of hydrogen compared, really the benchmark here is natural gas, and really it is a lot more expensive. And so we really have to look at how we get there. How do we get to a target, as mentioned by the DOE? And really looking at these kind of opportunities will really help us to get real practical and data experience to really understand how we can find the right solution for the right application. All right, so that's where I'll end today, and looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas. Looking forward to digging a little bit deeper into that microgrid that you guys are creating as well.
All right, thank you.
The next panelist that I want to introduce is Bill Brown, who's the executive chairperson and co-founder of 8 Rivers Capital. And in 8 Rivers, they commercialize breakout energy technologies, including clean fossil fuel power technologies, space, aerospace technologies, wireless, gigabyte wireless technologies, and hydrogen, really with a focus today on hydrogen production. So we'll hear a lot of the techno-economics from Bill. And Bill was a professor prior to 8 Rivers. He was a professor at Duke Law and had an extensive career on Wall Street. So when he's talking about the economics, he really understands where the investment community is coming from and what it's going to take to really to use that capital wisely. So Bill, I'll turn it over to you.
Scott, thank you so much, and it's great to have all of you here. I'm going to, step back here, and the office that you see behind me is at Duke, so I'm sort of back at Duke teaching. I'm teaching equity valuation and advanced financial statement analysis this semester, and then next semester I'm teaching the big corporate finance class, as well as structuring venture capital and private equity. I just think the students here are fantastic, and I'm so pleased to be back at Duke. So I thank you, and David, thank you so much for everything that you and E4 Carolinas do to create a welcome ecosystem here for us and all of us on this call, because as I look at the history of Silicon Valley was an ecosystem that was cultivated by a small number of people, and it was their vision and their persistence and cultivation that really made it work. So with that one, let me just sort of look here at hydrogen looking forward, and I sort of take this from 2 sides, and so I'm going to start off in what I'll sort of say is more of a professor mode. To achieve net zero carbon emissions by mid-century, we need to spend $5 to $10 billion a day for the next 30 years. That's a big number. And, I think that we're at the point here where I know people are thinking about costs and the like today. At some point, if you don't, the longer you wait, the more you're going to be operating from under the specter of catching up. So you can either be part of the solution, or I think that the chances that you will get trampled. And on that one, let's go to what today's big companies can tell us about the future of ESG. You know, on the right here, you're seeing these big companies. These big companies were not the world's big companies as recently as 15 years ago. They just weren't. And I mean, the big companies 15 years ago were the ones being pushed out to the side, and the ones that are sort of in effect that are at risk. Now, there are 4 types of winners in today's inner circle, and those fall in, and we're going to see the same sort of winners here. That was $5 to $10 billion a day globally. That comes from Morgan Stanley's $50 trillion worth of expenditures, or IEA's $100 trillion worth of expenditures globally that we need to do. But so these are the 4 types of winners that we're going to see. Platform companies in red, they're among the biggest. The next ones are silo busters. If you think about it, these are the ones that basically took on some of the big companies and made them obsolete or partially obsolete. So Amazon is in some respects mostly a combination of Sears and IBM, but it's also a combination of Novell and FedEx in that Amazon's business model was to take its cost centers and turn them into profit centers. And Apple, they basically took Canon cameras and Sony electronics and BlackBerry email, and basically each one of those companies on the right there were just sort of marginalized. Google's Alta Vista and IBM and Madison Avenue Advertising. Then you have the capital light intermediaries, which is, you know, either owning a critical appliance, software, or material in a much bigger ecosystem, and that's those people there, or taxing the ecosystem at an essential point, like with ads and finance, and those are those people. And then there are the supply chain dominators. Well, I'll call that capital-heavy, real estate-focused people like Walmart and Home Depot. And then there's the capital-light intermediaries that are dominating their supply chain. The bottom line, though, is what I put in the lower left-hand box. Because so much has to be spent in so little time, this sort of business as usual, the way we analyze the future of what we're going to spend our money on, that's not going to work. It just won't work. You'll be out of business by the time other people will disintermediate you. And so we've got to be fleet of foot, technology agnostic, and integrated. And so the 3 key success factors for this, I think, is supply busters, integrators, and platforms. In other words, combine hydrogen and power and chemicals and direct air capture. Why? Because cogeneration drives costs down. And the second thing is you need to be capital light intermediaries to help us deploy all this. And I don't think the banks there's no one out there. The banks only have expertise in doing what the banks are, what the industry knows. But there are very few people in the industry who are really focused on the integration piece. And finally, I don't think that we have time to sort out supply chain dominators in this immediately. They will sort themselves out ultimately. But I think people who are going after the supply chain, that takes too long a time to figure out how to dominate that. This is just going to be about execution. So, and this is what the energy ecosystem of tomorrow will look like, a data network. As you see, the left, right is hydrogen and water, electricity, CO2. I mean, all those things are like data in a network. And that's the left, right. And then you have all these applications hanging off of that network, users and data centers and search engines and hosted software and software as a service. It all hangs off of it. And that's going to require us to rethink the way we think of things. Because if you are an energy company, you don't want to supply just electricity. You want to supply electricity and hydrogen. Why? Because by providing them both together, you'll make them each cheaper than they are in their silos. When we look at it, this is the benefits of cogeneration. These are first of a kind thing here on the left. This is looking at levelized cost of hydrogen. This is how you get hydrogen down to $1 a kilo, or 50 cents a kilo, or 96 cents a kilo, or 60 cents a kilo. It's a combination of, part of it is we've got base load electricity revenue here that we can sell simultaneously with our hydrogen production. So that takes us down. We've got peaking electricity revenue that we can sell on top of that. And then we got capital costs and OpEx that takes us back up. over here, we actually put in the CO2 tax credits, you know, the 45Q tax credits. That even makes it even cheaper. But the point here is, and then over here on the right, you flip it around. Let's assume that we were selling hydrogen at 35 cents a kilo. Well, what does that make electricity in dollars per megawatt hour? Well, even at a stupidly, you know, 35 cents a kilo, why do I choose 35 cents a kilo? Because at 35 cents a kilo, hydrogen is worth around $3 a million BTU. That's the cost of natural gas today. That's where hydrogen becomes a substitute. Well, flip it around. If you're cogening hydrogen and putting it at a stupidly cheap price of 35 cents, what's your levelized cost of electricity? That's that. Other part of the ecosystem is ammonia. On the right, you can see all the prices of ammonia that are today, and they're actually higher than that, and I need to update that piece. But you can see we can get ammonia down to these really, really cheap prices. And you put it all together on this chart and convert it all into this sort of a constant dollars per million BTU. If you look at this bottom chart, you'll see here, look at this $3, the second column here. $3 a million BTU, say for natural gas, is the equivalent of 34-cent hydrogen, is the equivalent of $64 a metric ton ammonia, which is the way we price ammonia, is the equivalent of 37-cent gasoline. By the way, note that 34 cents a kilo of hydrogen, 37 cents a gallon of gasoline. Kilo of hydrogen and a gallon of gasoline have roughly the same energy content. That's what that tells you. And then that translates to $122 a metric ton for bunker fuel. And so up here at the top, you see our competitive pricing scenarios. This is the range of bunker fuel prices in the US, the range in the EU and Singapore, and the range in nat gas over 15-year, all these are over 15-year periods. Well, over those periods, what would our range of hydrogen costs be with these, and what would be our range of ammonia costs? And you can see that the hydrogen cost is a little more expensive than natural gas, but not a lot. And our ammonia costs are pretty much smack in the middle of bunker fuel. And that's why we can take shipping. So the key to hydrogen, I know I'm going quickly here, I'm covering a lot of material, is number one, we've got to understand and address the challenges of hydrogen. Hydrogen has to be clean, cheap, and transportable. Electrolysis is clean but not cheap. Steam methane reforming is thought to be cheap. It's clearly cheap, but it's historically not been thought to be clean, but it's now getting clean. And neither one of them, hydrogen is really hard to transport except as a gas. And that's why I think that some of the things that Callum mentioned about liquid organic hydrogen carriers, he mentioned methyl cyclohexane. And also there's some other promising ones like DBT out there, dibenzyl toluene, that can make it cheaper. And ammonia is a good transportable thing too. We got to prepare for our Amazon moment. Tomorrow's hydrogen is the equivalent of putting together Sears and IBM. Today's hydrogen is the equivalent of Sears. We got to break down the silos, focus on getting real purchase agreements, roll it out in the right order, start with the easiest transport logistics, pipelines, ammonia for ocean-borne shipping and fleets. And then we couple electrolyzers and fuel cells with LOHCs. Not enough people are looking at those two together. And then we move forward. You just got to get building and start writing checks. Don't care about the color, care about whether it's clean. That's it. Whoa.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. So that was very eye-opening, and look forward to digging into those numbers a bit more. So if the panelists can all come back on cameras, and we'll start to take a few questions. And I think, Stephanie, we'll start with you. You know, you talked about the rural cooperatives, the communities that they serve, and you know the mass of these cooperatives across the U.S. and so in my opinion, for hydrogen to really have impact, we've got to educate those communities and like you said, get their buy-in through community engagement. So what do you see kind of when you describe community engagement? Can you talk a little bit more in detail about what that really means? Because we're going to be going through these efforts from a regional perspective. So now is the time to really start informing all the stakeholders on what that really means. So
Right. Yes. Thank you for that question. And I mean, this goes beyond just hydrogen. I think we talk a lot about community engagement as being critical for folks to feel like they have buy-in to the processes. New technologies coming into their communities that can raise questions. They want to know what are the benefits, what are potential challenges. I think something that we try to remember is, I mean, I think events like this are part of that education process, right? Is just getting in front of people who will be potentially influencing or making decisions along the process. It's engaging with state regulators, state energy offices, local offices, just really making sure that you're engaging all levels in the process. I think it's also remembering too, though, that you have to meet people where they are. And in some of our communities, another big challenge that co-ops and the communities they serve face are that broadband is still not accessible in some of these places. And we're seeing more federal dollars go towards that, including in the infrastructure bill. So hopefully that challenge is more and more, we're chipping away at that. But just keeping that in mind, that sending having virtual conferences or emails, that type of thing, may not necessarily be reaching everyone where they're at. So it's getting creative, thinking about other community events going on where they are, whether it's having, you know, the state fair or other events, trade shows, a lot of things with EVs right now. Co-ops are having EVs that they're getting out into their communities so that people can sort of, you know, touch and feel them, see a new technology, just getting outside of the box a little bit. And that's the type of thing that I think when you can do that early and often, it's going to make a big difference down the road. So that's where I would start.
no, thank you. So another aspect, we got a few questions in the chat, and wanted to bring up one of those that is related to pipelines. But before we get to that, Callum, this is a question for probably you and for Thomas. That you know, you talked a lot about the current natural gas infrastructure, the pipeline there, the types of steels that are there, and what is the current safe level of hydrogen that can be placed into the current U.S. fleet of natural gas pipelines, right? And I know that Sunita's office is funding a lot of work through HyBlend to look at that blending of hydrogen and natural gas. But I also wanted to see if you had any thoughts on composite pipeline and what could be done. What are the uses for it? So maybe a two-part question there. What are the current safe levels of hydrogen that can be placed in the current U.S. natural gas pipeline? And then do you see composite pipeline really, do you see a place for it in the hydrogen infrastructure?
That's a great question. I'm happy to go first if you like, Thomas. So in terms with the safe working levels, like you alluded to there, Scott, there's a lot of research and development which is taking place. So notably around a UK example within the National Grid, what we're doing here is they are doing a specific test called the high NTS, the National Transmission System. They're setting up a network with the existing pipe infrastructures they've got, and then they're going to be putting in different percentage levels of hydrogen to determine what the real impact is, because at the moment it's not really covered by code. So specifics for the US infrastructure is predominantly that's all designed from weaker steels, so kind of X42, X50 steels. So what it's staying within the current research and development and testing and codes is that can go up to 10% or if not more. So it will be 10% based on the current levels without having to actually change anything, because that's kind of outside of a code requirement. But then when you go above 10%, you might just have to have a slight penalization on your energy efficiency numbers. Your energy ratio will be a slight drop, but you would already have the kind of the benefits from that. So where the use of kind of non-metallics is another way to think about it, is so just composites and PE pipes, that is definitely going to be used within the future. So I mainly see that being used in terms of the distribution of it, so getting it out from the main backbone hubs into the individual users. So anything less than 6 inches in diameter will most likely be within these composite style pipes. PE pipes, they can be quick to install. That can be really easy to use. It's a quick way of getting it out to the users. You just need to look for the levels of permeation you get through the hydrogen, because it's such a small molecule. You will get permeation through. Just you need to be aware of the dangers and the risks associated with that.
And is any of that pipeline, are there any studies out there currently to look at that you're aware of?
The use of non-metallic, so polyurethane pipe has already been quite qualified for use. So that High Deploy in the UK was using that type of pipe, and that was shown at 15%. It's absolutely no issues at all. But they always say the fact that the review was from it, the users were annoyed that they didn't know they had hydrogen in the system. So that's exactly what you really want to know. You want to know the fact that the users don't know that they've got hydrogen. So that was all shown to be safe, and that's now gone into the HSE in the UK, Health and Safety Executive, as that we can potentially start raising our number now. But I think it's underway. It's just a lot of testing to be done in the next few years. And if you want to go higher, you'll need to dig up an individual bit of pipe and then send it off to a test house. But there's not many test houses that are around. So like Bill mentioned, there's a lot of money that's got to be spent to develop these test houses and develop the capability of getting it ready.
All right, thank you. And Thomas, any thoughts on that? Are you guys looking at that when you're in your microgrid that you're creating, the pipeline, the distribution from your hydrogen production source, your electrolyzer, or your storage over to your gas turbine?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'd say our focus isn't so much on the pipeline, right? We would work actually with Wood Group. We've cooperated with them on the past for those type of questions. But let's say, I mean, maybe it could be like an existing asset, right, that you have and that you want to include hydrogen now. I'd say that's a very common question that we're receiving from pretty much all our customers. And I mean, we're looking at, I'd say, two main things that I would say. Let's say for an existing fossil plant, one would be the materials, right? And that's something, we're looking at, 10 to 15% hydrogen. Most of the designs are compatible with that today, right? And then the last one that I'll mention are emissions. So when you introduce hydrogen into, let's say, into combustion, it does have an impact on emissions, and we're talking mainly about NOx, okay? And so then, and that it really depends on the combustion and the product line you have, what kind of technology they have, and there, it can range anywhere from fairly low if it's something a little bit older or doesn't have a lot of flexibility. So let's say 5 to 30, right? The example I gave today on the HL class, that has 50% capability. And that's actually the result of a DOE program that we worked on from 2005 to 2015, where we developed technologies that are really specific to hydrogen, right? So a key concern is flashback, right, where the flame wanders upstream. And so through that DOE program, we developed flashback resistant technologies which were incorporated into our products. Okay, and that's how that's really a real benefit of such activities. Yeah, and that you can see enters our products.
No, thank you. So Bill, I wanted to get into some of your numbers, and what struck me right away was the mention of $5 to $10 billion per day investment required to really achieve all of this. Do you know? So I guess my first thought was, does that include failures, right? Because we're going to be investing in a lot of new technology that's out there, and so if we're investing and we know that some of the technology isn't going to work exactly right, we're going to have to go through optimization. So do those investment dollars include the propensity to have some failures in there? And then you talked a lot about we've got to change the perspective or the paradigm for investing. What's so how do we make that change of we've got to move fast, we can't overanalyze. I mean, how do we get from where we are today, where we do tons of due diligence and everything's got to be outlined before they'll invest in a new technology, and they have to understand it. And I know in a lot of the hydrogen technologies, it's very complex and it's new to the world, right? So can you talk a little bit about that? How do you get the investment community there?
Well, it's, first of all, let me point out that $5 to $10 billion, 1 day's worth of investment is all the failures that you'll ever need. Right? So, and the reason I say the $5 to $10 billion came from looking at Morgan Stanley's 50 trillion and looking at IEA's 100 trillion that they said needs to be spent, and then it came from my own work in doing a bottoms-up analysis of various systems that 8 Rivers had, and what it would replace, what it would take to use with those systems to replace on a bottoms up. And it really sort of came out to the same number, right? I always do top down and bottoms up. Those are where those numbers came. And the reason why I want those numbers out there is because I don't think people realize this is a heart attack. We have a heart attack that we realize we need to understand this is how much needs to be spent. We're in this dire a shape. And we cannot sit around and say, oh, I want to see it work, or I want to see. If you're in the I want to see it work, your company will probably go under, because the people who are willing to take the risk will eat you for lunch. And so we're in a world that's going to be, and for all these students on the line, this is the biggest opportunity that you will ever see. The world has never seen this infrastructure buildup that we have to go through. We saw something similar happen with the .com development, but the difference between .com is .com happened organically, and the winners sort of emerged out the end, and we didn't know where it was going to go. Whereas this one, we actually know where we have to go. We got to hit net zero. We got to land this plane. We got to land this plane on zero in 2050, and if we don't, it's going to crash. We know this. The glide path, we got this glide path. So now, how do you finance this? About 5 years ago or 6 years ago at 8 Rivers, I was in the middle of Net Power, and I realized that new technologies require 10 years of work to get them out to the point where you can commercialize them. And I said to the whole team, I said, guys, we got to stop doing new technologies. Don't want new technologies. Net Power is our one little purple Lego. We made a purple Lego, but otherwise we need to stick with red, yellow, green, blue Legos. No more purple Legos, no clear Legos, no, purple, no more new Legos. So we got to stick with, and so everything that you see on the hydrogen system we've done is off the shelf, steam methane reformer, ATR, GHR, but integrated, heat integrated with other systems. And once but think about it this way. If I've got a power system that's running at 67% capacity factor, which means for the students, it's only being used 60 to 70% of the time. Well, I've got equipment sitting idle for 30 to 40% of the time. If I can take that factory and that other balance of plant and direct that towards making hydrogen, I'm now using my capital 100% of the time. And so you can view the cogen, and this is the reason I call it cogen. The beauty of what we're doing is cogen without co-location. Typical cogen is, oh, I'm going to produce combined heat and power. Fine. Well, I got to be located. My power has to be produced in the same place I need my heat. If instead I produce chemicals, hydrogen or DBT or ammonia or whatever, I can put those through pipelines, and now I have cogeneration without the need to co-locate.
Exactly.
That is what is going to transform everything.
No, I hear you, and I thank you for those comments, because I think what you're getting to is the integrated energy systems, the integration of all these technologies that we have to get to really make this happen, and we're just on the front end of that, right? So, but I want to thank the panelists all for your comments and your presentations today. I think we're at the end of this panel today. I know we've got a lot more questions from the audience, and I will say a lot of those have to deal with some of the technical questions in hydrogen. And Sunita's going to love me for this, but I'll say please bring those up when during Sunita's presentation, and she can answer them all for you. So I'll go ahead and turn it back over to David. But once again, thank you for the panelists. I think this was a great panel, very enlightening today.
Scott, Stephanie, Colin, Thomas, Bill, thank you so much. Obviously, from the queue of questions in chat and the conversations and the topics we've covered, this was not a 75-minute discussion. It's not a day-long discussion. It's an ongoing discussion. And we're just pleased that you were to provide us a slice of that and heighten our awareness. For all those that pose questions in chat, I have captured every question. I will put those in an email to all of the panelists. I will copy each of you that have posed a question, because I have all of your emails from registration, or I know you. And we'll basically form an email chat where anything that's unanswered can get addressed by our various panelists, and you can interact in that manner with them. Again, everyone, thank you very much.